Good morning everybody, and you join me in a lovely rural location. We have wild irises, we have some bulrushes, we have birds singing behind me, but today's location is a bit different, because were this 100 years ago, I wouldn't be stood here right now. Good morning everyone, or good afternoon for you. My name's Richard Hornby, and you join me here in Baxter Wood, on what used to be one of the busiest railway lines in the northeast, but following the beach enclosures is now a nature area and cycleway. If you look over behind me, you can see, and we'll head this way for a few minutes shortly, the Dns Valley Railway heading up towards the steelworks in Concert. The Dns Valley Railway opened in 1862 and closed to passengers during World War II, finally fully closing on the 20th of June 1966. The railway was primarily built as a freight line to service the Concert ironworks, and headed from here in Broom Park and Baxter Wood along what is now the Dns Valley footpath all the way up to Lanchester and then on to Concert. But today we're going to head the other way and explore what it was once the biggest series of railway junctions in the northeast. And where I was stood a minute ago next to this pond was the site of Baxter Wood Junction. The signal box was up over by the gates in the distance, and we're going to see 5 different railway lines converge and diverge as we head along today's walk. So we'll also spot nature, of course, and hopefully we'll spend a little bit of time walking along each of the railways in the next 15 minutes or so. So this line behind me was heading out to the west. We're currently heading east, and as you can hear, the East Coast Main Line, one of the trains on there, is where this line is eventually heading. But you can see in front of me that the path splits. On the left hand side, which we're heading towards now, is the old route towards Raleigh, and to the north this joins onto the East Coast Main Line and heads towards Durham Station. This woodland area is called Baxter Wood, and although it used to be quite a bit smaller, has always been a woodland area. Whereas the route we're going to be taking today is the path over to the right here, and this is called the Loop Line. The Loop Line is one of the newer lines in this area. I say new, the East Coast Main Line is the newest of them, and connects the Dns Valley Railway and the little area I was studying at the start of the video to the East Coast Main Line heading south, and also the railway lines to Bishop Auckland and Crook, which we'll see in a few minutes. So this woodland is slightly different to the woodlands that we've seen before on our walks, in that it's newer and it's also a managed pine wood. And one thing to think about here is this little valley looks like it contained the railway line where I'm stood. It did, but also the railway line carried on. And if I take this little path up here for a second, what will surprise you maybe perhaps somewhat is that the actual edge of the railway cutting is up here, and there used to be a signal box just in the trees in front of where the camera is right now. So this used to be a much wider line than is currently visible, and there were actually at one point 4 tracks going through this section of woodland, and we are on the southernmost of those on this footpath. This is quite a popular cycleway, walkway, footpath, so we might have to take this in a few chunks because, as always, there will be people exercising, and as we've said before, it's not very nice to film people, and it's not appropriate to film people without their permission. Even though we're on a public right of way, I wouldn't like anybody putting a camera in my face as they're walking past, so I may be turning the camera off at some points. Plus also it enables us to see a little bit more of the railway line. But as I say, this is the loop line, and we're heading now towards the most modern of the railway lines that we'll come across on this walk, the East Coast Main Line. Now, I say modern, it's been there since 1871. It has been changed a few times, as I'll point out when we get a little bit closer. But this is the second of today's major railway lines. So we've got the Lanchester Valley Line, we've got the East Coast Main Line that heads to the north and the south. We've then got the Bishop Auckland to Durham line, which we'll be walking on in maybe about 30 seconds or so. And then we've got at the end the Dns Valley line towards Crook. I know people who like watching these walks do so for the bird song. This might be slightly less bird song than one of my normal walk videos, but hopefully it's still got something that's a bit of interest for everybody. Now, as there's a runner coming past, I'm going to pause the video and I'll join you again at the junction. So here we are, having walked a little bit further along the line at the only active railway that we're going to look at today, the East Coast Main Line. You're looking north towards Durham now, and as I pan round you'll see the electric generators here, the distribution for the overhead power cables, and this is heading south towards Darlington. And just to give you an idea of how that relates to the railway line I was walking on, the loop line, if I just jump up here, there's the loop line. So they are basically next to each other here. And at this point, all four railway lines going in 5 different directions used to merge, and the railway network itself here was very, very complicated. In fact, it was actually at 4 different levels, so all the lines could cross over and access most of the other lines. What you see going above the railway line here is the road from the Stone Bridge to Broom Park. Broom Park is where we'll be finishing today, and this is obviously a new bridge from the 1960s. The original bridge you can see the abutment of just here, and this bridge headed across basically to where the other bridge came from, but they left the old abutment in. So there's the active East Coast Main Line heading off south. Apologies for the echo here. And here is where we start the junction to the 2 branch lines. Now, as I said before, the railway, it was at different levels. Don't think, well, this little incline here doesn't look very railway-like. The actual line was on an overpass at this point and diving into that junction. So there were, as I say, quite a lot of different levels, quite a lot of different pieces of track. And this was even more complicated in the we have a train going past in the cutting. more complicated in the late 1800s by the fact that there was also a pit working here. On the right hand side here, I just head up through the trees a little, and again, yes, this is an embankment, a bit of railway on that side, a bit of railway on this side. Over there where the grass is in the distance was the site of the Broom Park colliery, which is where my walk ends after visiting the other two lines that I mentioned. So this little section of line is heading towards what was called Dns Valley Junction, which lay about here. And what we're going to do is we're going to briefly take the Bishop Auckland branch, and then we're going to head back, join the Dns Valley line. So as you can see, the path in front of me bears down towards the right, which is heading over to the oldest line here, by not very much, the Dns Valley line. But first we're going to head over to the Bishop Auckland line. Now the exact route of the track here was probably in the trees to the left of me here. But the Bishop Auckland line opened to passengers on the 1st of April 1857 and opened to goods on the 19th of August 1856, and was again closed in the beaching cuts of, I'll correct that, and was closed in 1864, not 1964, as it was really replaced by the East Coast Main Line. And there's a few warnings here on this gate, pedestrians only, and telling most people to go around that way. And the reason for that is, or will be, very clear imminently as we walk through this little patch of woodland. Again, I think that the railway line was probably to our left at this point, although I'm happy to be corrected in the comments. I think this sign here explains why people are being advised to go a slightly different route. Because the railway line didn't, obviously, because trains do not, go down a steep hill. The reason for the steep hill is because the railway line used to go level. And again, I think there might be remnants, but I suspect they're all cleared away in this woodland over here to my left of why we're heading downwards now. And that's because there used to be, going through this woodland, a viaduct that took this railway line over towards Brandon and Meadowfield, because down there, down where the footpath goes, is the site, or is the not the site of, the actual River Brownie. And the River Brownie had a viaduct going over it, which was somewhere about where I'm stood now. So we're going to head back to the last of our railway lines, and I'm going to correct my handwriting. This was a beach enclosed railway. It was 1926. I'm not sure why I wrote 18 on my note, but it was 1964. And we're going to head over to the oldest railway line now, which was the Dns Valley Railway, which opened on the 1st of January 1858 for goods and closed in 1951. This one is the line that closed just before Beeching, and this headed in the direction of Crook and is still primarily an open route that you can walk on today. So up there is the Baxter Wood Junction and the Dns Valley Junction, and we're heading over here back to the slightly bit bigger footpath heading down towards Crook. Now this area heads through a picnic site at the Broom Park picnic area. 2 seconds please. As I said, this area is very popular with cyclists and dog walkers. I've got a little spaniel on the path in front of me, and this is the Broom Park picnic area. And the reason the picnic area is here is that all this open area to my left was once the Broom Park colliery. It wasn't one of the bigger collieries in County Durham, but it occupied most of the land towards the seats and over on my right hand side. And once again we have a lot of birdsong. As you can see by the signs in front of me, the footpath towards Brandon and Bishop Auckland still exists, but it's not along the old railway line. There's essentially a diversion onto a slightly lesser incline. But if you can imagine that about maybe 50 years ago, instead of woodland going all the way down through this valley, what you'd see are masonry arches at about this level heading across, and it would certainly look different to the environment we have today. So I'm just going to have a couple more minutes on the railway, heading the Dns Valley Railway, heading over towards Crook. As you see, these footpaths here are extremely long. We've actually walked about half a mile today, but this heads on towards Crook for 8 miles, and is probably one of the most popular footpaths and walking routes in Durham, mainly because it's very easy to access the site and very good smooth surface on which to walk or ride your bike. So anyway, I think that's going to bring us to the end of today's Wednesday walk, exploring the old railway lines around County Durham. So thank you very much for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you on Friday for another episode of Tea with Richard. And remember folks, if you've been out walking or if you've been drinking tea whilst watching this, do remember that once you've finished your tea, wash your hands. Have a lovely day folks. Goodbye.